Hey everybody, it is Heather, and today I am going to try to tell my birth story and where I have been for the past few months. The last video that I posted, I was pregnant, and I was in somewhere around 24 weeks pregnant probably. I knew that I was having a baby in January-ish because of some complications that I was having during my pregnancy. Come to find out, I had my baby in December. My due date was originally February 26th. I had my daughter on December 11th at 4:43 in the afternoon. Long, scary story, but I'm gonna try to make it quick. It's taken me a long time to be able to tell this story, so I'm going to try to make it quick. When I was 18 weeks pregnant, I was diagnosed with placenta previa, complete placenta previa, and placenta accreta. Placenta previa is when your placenta covers your cervix, so your baby has no way to get out vaginally. And placenta accreta is when your placenta starts growing through and attaches to your uterus. My placenta accreta, I didn't know at the time, had grown into an increta. It was growing outside of my uterus. Well, I had placenta previa with my last child, my second child, my son, and he had to come at 34 weeks because of major bleeds. I was hospitalized 3 times, and the 3rd time they just went ahead and gave me a C-section. Well, with this baby, who was born in December, I went and picked up my daughter from school, and I was running to the grocery store to pick up apples. Of all things, I was literally going in to get apples. I had left my teenager in the car with my 3-year-old, and I was walking into the grocery store, and I started bleeding. And when I say I started bleeding, I was pouring blood. I turned around at the entrance of the bilo. I was in the bilo. I turned around at the entrance where the buggy corral is and started walking out. I was walking towards my car, and I know this makes no sense, but I thought if I kept my legs tight, the blood would stop. That's nonsense. It has nothing to do with the blood. I get back to my car, and I called my husband and told him that I'm bleeding bad, and that he needed to get to where I was because I didn't want to drive a long distance bleeding in the car because I have a new car and I don't want to mess it up. Well, there was a lady in the car next to me, and she saw me standing on the outside of my car bleeding. I had black yoga pants on, but I had like ivory colored bobs on, and my shoes were at this point red. They were completely covered in blood. And she's like, "You need to call 911. You're gonna, bleed to death, or your baby's gonna die." And I'm like, "No, I'll be okay. I've had bleeding before. I'll be fine," because this wasn't my first bleed with this pregnancy either. I started getting a little woozy, but I didn't call 911. I called my husband. He was at work about 25 to 35 minutes away at his job. He's like, "Fine, I'm on my way, call 911. I'm like, "No, I'll wait for you. I don't need to call 911. Well, the lady who was in the car next to me, her daughter came out of the grocery store and said, "You need to call 911. I'm like, "No." Next thing you know, I fainted from blood loss. My daughter, my 13-year-old, was screaming, crying, "Mom, Mom, Mom." She thought I had died or was dying. It's so hard to tell the story. It just brings back bad memories. Well, I decided when I finally came back the first time to call 911. I called 911, and the poor dispatch lady's like, "Well, where are you?" I'm like, "I'm at Bilo." She's like, "What's your address?" I'm like, "I don't know, Bilo parking lot. I mean, I don't know where I am. I'm at the Bilo." She's like, "Well, what's wrong?" I'm like, "I have placenta previa and placenta accreta, and I'm having a massive blood loss." She's like, "Okay." So they send the ambulance there, and by the time the ambulance got there, what could have been too long, I had already fainted again. They were trying to figure out, when the ambulance got there, what to do with my 2 kids. The lady in the car next to me, God bless her soul, she thought my 13-year-old could drive to the hospital. Like, she's only 13, she cannot drive. I mean, very sweet lady, but still, my 13-year-old can't drive. It's against the law, for one thing. For another thing, no, not my daughter. They are trying to get me in the back of the ambulance on the stretcher, and the stretcher will not collapse to get in the back of the ambulance. And I'm fainting again. I fainted again. And they're like, if we don't get her to the hospital soon, she's going to die. I mean, the amount of blood that I lost at the scene was tremendous. They finally managed to get me in the back of the ambulance, and I'm like, I cannot leave my 2 children here. There's no way. I can't leave my 3-year-old in a parking lot with my 13-year-old. My 13-year-old is very emotional. She's like high stress, and she was stressed out. They trying to figure out a way to get my son's car seat into the ambulance, and they didn't want the liability of putting him in the ambulance. So one of the first responders had decided that he would stay at the scene until my husband got there. We all knew my husband was on his way. They finally get me in the ambulance, and I keep asking, what are you going to do with my kids? What are you going to do with my kids? And they're like, your husband's on the way. He'll be here. I was scared. I didn't want my daughter. I didn't know at the time. I didn't know I was having a girl. I didn't want my baby to die. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to leave my kids at the same time. Finally, they get me in the ambulance, and they take me like, we have to go, or she's gonna bleed to death. They get me to the closest hospital, which is not the hospital I was supposed to deliver at. There wasn't even an MFM doctor at the hospital that I made it to. They had to call in an OB who was like the hospital, and then there's like a building over here, and they called her in to perform my emergency C-section. As soon as I got wheeled into the operating room, they're asking what's wrong with her, you know, yada yada yada, and they're like, her blood pressure is so low it won't read. I was bleeding to death. There's no doubt. Had they not gotten me to that hospital, I wouldn't be here, and neither would this little one in my lap. My husband at this time was on the way to pick up my kids. He actually passed my ambulance, and he figured it was me in the ambulance. He was on the phone with 911, and they told him to turn around and go to the hospital, that they were going to get the kids to the hospital. And he does a U-turn in the road, and he gets pulled, and he jumps out of the car, and the cop jumps out of the car at the same time with her gun drawn on my husband, because he jumped out of his car so abruptly. And he's like, I'm on the phone with 911, you know, my wife's bleeding to death, my kids are in the parking lot, I need to get to them so I can get them to the hospital. And she's like, I don't care, you don't get out of your car like that. And he's like, I don't care what you have to do, but I'm going to get my kids. So he gets back in his car, and the cop follows him to the parking lot of the grocery store. He gets the kids. He gets to the hospital. By the time he gets to the hospital, this little nugget was born already. They had her out. As soon as I got to the hospital, they asked me, you know, do you know your blood type? And I'm like, yeah. I told them. I don't know if they didn't hear me, because when you're passed out or you're going in and out of consciousness, you don't talk as loudly, apparently. Because apparently I was whispering, but I knew my blood type because I knew this was a possibility, the bleeding. I told them my blood type. They laid me down they put me over from the stretcher onto the operating table, and they're like, telling me that they're pulling my pants off, they're cutting my underwear off, taking my shoes off and everything. And, they're like, we're having a baby. And I'm like, we're having a baby? She's like, yeah, we're having a baby right now. I'm like, I looked at her like she was stupid. I'm like, you're not going to try to stop the bleeding? She's like, it's too late for that. So, they put me under. I wake up the next afternoon. This was at 4:43 is when my daughter was born. I wake up the next afternoon. I didn't know if my baby had lived or what had happened. If the baby was a boy or if the baby was a girl, if the baby lived. I was 29 weeks exactly pregnant when she was born. My baby was born at 4:43 in the afternoon. She weighed 3 pounds, 5 ounces, and she was 16 inches long. She was intubated and rushed to the Children's Hospital, which is where I was supposed to deliver. She stayed in the neonatal intensive care unit for 86 days and was just released Thursday. I've had her for 4 days. It's been a very long 4 days because it's hard adjusting to a newborn who is actually 3 months old. She turned 3 months old yesterday, and she's the same as a newborn. It's amazing. She health-wise was pretty healthy. She had some medical problems in the NICU, which I will touch on in another video. This video is mainly about my birth. While I was put to sleep during my C-section, I wound up having 12 liters of blood given to me. I bled more than I had in my body at the time. I was given more blood multiple times throughout my hospital stay as well, because I couldn't get my hemoglobin to come up to a healthy level. Actually, at this point, my hemoglobin is still not at a high level, but it's well enough that I only have to take iron for the next 6 months to, you know, whatever your body needs to do to pretty much adapt to the fact that you have so many liters of brand new blood that does not belong to you. I was given 12 liters in the operating room. They had to do a vertical incision, which I knew was going to happen because of the previa. When my son was born in 2015, I also had to have a vertical incision. So my C-section scar goes from my belly button to maybe this much above my vagina split. TMI, I'm sorry, I know that was TMI, but literally my C-section scar is from my belly button to where the good Lord split me. Not cool, but that's life, and that's how they had to come out. When I was in the operating room, I was bleeding pretty badly, obviously. They went and asked my husband, what do we do? We can't, he finally made it to the hospital with the kids, by the way. Like, what do we do? We can't get her bleeding to stop, so we have to perform a hysterectomy on her to get the bleeding to stop. And he's like, you do whatever you have to do to keep her alive. I can't do this alone with 3 kids. So I wake up the next afternoon, like I said, with no uterus and no baby with me. They performed the emergency C-section, the emergency hysterectomy, and I was intubated for 24 hours. I was in the ICU for 3 days, and then I was in the regular hospital for 2 more days, where I got multiple blood transfusions and platelet transfusions, and by the time I left that hospital, my DNA was not in my blood anymore. They actually joked that if I had committed a crime, my DNA would not be left at the scene. It would be somebody else's. Not funny. I was in the hospital for 5 days before I got to meet my little baby. I was told that she was a girl about 24 hours after she was born. My husband couldn't be in ICU with me. It was touch and go, so they didn't allow him to be in there. Apparently he told me, though, when I woke up, that it was you know, I asked, is the baby, what is the baby? And he's like, it's a girl, but I don't remember it. I thought I was dreaming. So the next day when he was allowed to come in there and I was, the intubation tube was taken out, I asked the doctor, I'm like, is my baby even alive? That was the first thing I said when I met her. She's like, oh God, yes, your baby's alive. I'm like, well, what is it? And the doctor's like, we're not allowed to tell you. We promised your husband we would not tell you what the baby was. I'm like, okay. So my husband comes later that afternoon and he's like, so do you know what the baby is? I'm like, no, I have no idea. Nobody will tell me. And he's like, well, it's a girl. I'm like, no way. It's a boy. Has to be a boy. I thought the whole time I was pregnant that I was having a boy. I was not having a boy, however. I had a little squishy baby girl, and she's beautiful. I'm not ready to show her to the world yet, but she's beautiful, and I will show her eventually. Probably when I tell her NICU story, which was long and tedious and dramatic, and one more word, long. It was amazing when I finally got to go meet her. When I got to go meet her, I cried. I cried because she was so small. I know there are so many babies in this world who are born smaller than her, but she had no fat on her. She was a perfectly formed baby. The only thing was her eyes were not completely unsealed yet. One of her eyes was not unsealed. The other one was like mostly unsealed, but like the out crack was not completely open yet. So other than that, she looked normal, except you could literally see all the bones in her body. And when people ask me how big she was, I always compare, like, her head was about the size of an orange. So small. She did great in the NICU, though, and she's a fighter, that's for sure, just like her mommy. Her birth was so memorable that every single person that I ran into in the hall when I was leaving the hospital to go meet her, every one of them knew my birth story. Like, every one of them knew, oh, that's the girl who was bleeding all over the hospital and almost bled to death. That's the girl who, you know, didn't know what her baby was. That's the girl who, her baby is in another hospital. That's the girl who had to have the hysterectomy, yada, yada, yada. We're so sorry. Long, terrible time. After that, I had a really hard time dealing with all the emotions that went with this. I was diagnosed with PTSD and postpartum depression, because I'm a control freak and everything was out of my control, and I didn't get to have the pretty little birth that I wanted. I don't get to have any more kids, and that's something that I haven't wrapped my mind around yet. I intended to have another baby, but now that's completely out of the story. I'm going to go. This video is much longer than I wanted it to be. I'm so sorry, and I'm all over the place because my mind is still not focused yet. Lack of sleep also. Thank you for watching this video, and if you have any questions about placenta accreta or placenta previa, please ask. This was my second placenta previa and my first accreta, so I have a lot of information on it, and I'll probably make a video about both of those things, because those are things that people need to know about. They need to know that these things they happen, and you can easily bleed to death, and you don't want that to happen. So if you're bleeding and you have previa or accreta, go to the hospital. You don't want your baby to die. You don't want to die. It's not cool. So thank you for watching my video, and I hope you all have a great day. Okay? Peace.